here, Bruce, we have all four: S&P, NASDAQ, Russell, and the Dow. So we start with the distributional formation. The main event here is the upthrust after distribution, after the stopping action. By the way, we've identified this last bar on November 5th as the bar that's going to unfold this whole series of events. First, the trading range, then volatility, then the major sign of weakness, then the redistribution, then the best rally in that redistribution, then the continuation to the downside. So let's see where we are. So I would say like we clearly see the trading range here, so a selling climax. And I usually label this as a major sign of weakness because it shows the switch from the upward bias to the downward bias. It confirms it. So definitely major sign of weakness. You could have a smaller automatic rally here, secondary test, phase A, and then you have some kind of upthrust. At the time, you could label this as a potential phase C, and you still would be making money. This is one point that in WTC classes I make so many times. Labeling is overrated. You guys should be concentrating on the analysis of the chart and tactical execution rather than thinking about, oh, here's the schematic, so I need to follow this. Some local sprain plus the test, and then we go down. And then Bruce, so here's an idea. What if we rally here? So first of all, where would we rally? There are multiple points here for us to rally to. For instance, all of those are areas that we would be thinking about where we could potentially rally. Resistance number 1, resistance number 2, 3, 4, and 5. We could most definitely overcome the first resistance just because it's easier. We are in the oversold condition. If demand comes in, we could go through that. I think that a very important bar in the decline was this one right here. This shows such a clean break. It has some intensity to the downside. So resistance number 2, overcoming that would actually suggest a much more bullish rally. And from the best rally that we have had, we might actually have even a better rally. And if we do have that, then we'll start talking about a change of behavior. And that could resolve itself in multiple ways. We could, for instance, have some kind of attempt to go down first, creating a much larger structure, a structure within the structure, or like in what is it? Was 1956, 57? We could gradually go up, gradually go up, gradually go up, gradually go up into some kind of upthrust, and overcoming all of these points of the resistance if the rally is going to follow, that type of analog that we have had. So from that perspective, it's a very interesting point here, Bruce, as to how we would label this point, because everything else seems to be like understandable. If we have a rally, this automatically will become a spring. I don't necessarily like the spring; it's too deep. I don't want to call this a shakeout. Just because of this overextension, just because there is no confirmation by the volume signature. I think we're going to end up calling it a spring if we have the rally. If we are consolidating here, and then after that we're dropping down, then this is easy. Sign of weakness, which is the major sign of weakness, last point of supply, trading range, and then just continuation to the downside. So this is kind of like my thinking on labeling, Bruce. And maybe you could take another index and just go through the same exercise.
Yeah, so if we look at the Russell bottom left, you can see there that there's a really substantial structure, and there was a lot of talk about whether or not that was reaccumulation or distribution. Generally, people were thinking of it as reaccumulation, and it would be okay to think of it that way tactically. Because the whole idea is that when you start to get evidence that that's not the case anymore. And so the only thing I'll point out here, Ramon, is that when you had that throw over in the Russell, which was an upthrust after distribution, and I'd like to point out that the upthrust after distribution in the S&P 500 is that the aftermath of that upthrust and then the test and the failure is exactly the way a UTAD should act, because think of the term up thrust after distribution means that the CO has basically disgorged all of their stock. And so there's no longer strong hands to support the market because they've completed their selling activities and they can just let the market go down. And that's exactly what happened in that upthrust after distribution. Similar thing happened in the Russell. And what told us that the reaccumulation structure was not the appropriate call was when that bar that broke back in below the resistance level and broke back down, that very big distribution bar right there, and that put it right back in the middle of the range, which was a major act of weakness in this chart. And so sometimes single bars can be very, very important. And
know-it-all bar by David Weiss. David gave this definition, know-it-all bar. So that was change of behavior, know-it-all bar.
And then there's a trading range with no lift, which has the characteristics of really kind of being under the ice, and then it's just a failure out of the range. And then look at what's happened. Now you've had another redistribution, and it's just stair-stepping lower on the way down. So so I'll leave it at that. So very interesting.
I like how the test is being formed here, Bruce. I mean, like if we would be thinking about like, okay, I'll give it to you, let it be a spring. Okay, so how would the spring be tested? The volume on the actual spring has to decline into the test. Do we have that? Yes.
Yes.
The structure should be formed as the higher low on the test itself. We have that. Now we need only confirmation of that. How would the confirmation look like? Overcoming the high between the spring and the test, and preferably with some kind of aggression, whether it's a series of up bars or maybe just one significant bar that would come to the previous resistance, and then it would kind of mitigate the construction of the structure at that point. But that would act as this confirmatory bar that indeed we have experienced a deep spring, a test, and then a confirmation.
And that would be called a number 2 spring because the volume is so high on the spring low. And so it's referred to as a number 2, must be tested. And the number 2 spring, high volume on the low, that must be tested at a later date, which Roman is pointing out it is being tested.